What is going on, Sixers fans? Welcome back into another edition of Trust the Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Tuman, as always. And I said on the last episode, I want to get back into doing more episodes about the Sixers more consistently, and I want to deliver on that. So today I wanted to take a look at the Sixers once again. We're coming up on the trade deadline this coming week. All-Star Weekend's around the corner. So kind of take a check-in on our Sixers. I'm joined today by former guest on the pod making his return today. Zach Karpf is with me. Zach, thank you so much for joining me today. A lot of Sixers topics we're going to get into.
Yeah, I'm super excited. You know, the Sixers have been definitely a spectacle this season with all of their back and forth play. So, and especially with some of the more recent news, you know, we got a lot to talk about. So I'm looking forward to getting into it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I spoke about that on last episode, but it's only continued over this past week. Just this team will play up or down to competition at any level. We saw it last night. They're playing New Orleans, the Kings a couple nights ago as well. They're just in close games with bad teams, but then they play great teams, and for the most part, they're in close games. So we can get into all that, but you just kind of touched on it. Very negative news for the Sixers this week. Paul George suspended for 25 games for violating the anti-drug policy. Just at this point in the season especially, felt like the worst possible timing. There's always something with the Sixers. I guess we have to start there because it's a huge hole in the Sixers lineup for the next, month or two of the season. Just what was your reaction to that news, and, how are you kind of feeling with Paul George here?
Well, so you want to talk about blindsided. I'm outside in 10-degree weather in State College getting ready to watch the outdoor hockey game at Beaver Stadium for the men's hockey team. And I look at my phone and I see the notification and I read it and I'm like, this has to be like a joke account, right? So I think nothing of it, and I put my phone back in my pocket and I get another notification, and it's an ESPN notification saying the same thing. I'm like, oh crap, this is real. And I turn to my dad and I'm like, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen, because it's not like his performance this season has been stellar or anything to really talk about. I mean, he had a great game the other day. I'm pretty sure he tied the franchise record in 3 points made in that game. And I watched the end of the game and I was like, I made a joke that like, oh, they're going to drug test him. Cause when I watched the Eagles games and somebody has a crazy performance, like, they're going to get drug tested after the game. It's just protocol. And I said it as a joke because why would Paul George at his age and at this point in his career be taking PEDs? And the fact that I was correct is just ridiculous. And especially given the time of the season that we're in, they're on a 3-game win streak against, pretty mediocre to bad teams. They've got a crazy difficult stretch coming up to start February. This is the time where we need a veteran like Paul George to be on the floor. And not having him puts the Sixers in honestly a pretty bad spot going into, this really, really tough start to February.
I agree. I was really disappointed because I've defended Paul George pretty vigorously for a while, even before his Sixers tenure started. But I think he's met the calling this year. I think, in the games he's played, he's done what he's needed. Now that they have Edgecombe, he's pretty much the fourth option. He's played very well in that role. He's probably the team's best defender. And he's been mostly healthy. He's sitting back-to-backs to kind of conserve himself, but he hasn't really dealt with a lot of injuries since the first month of the season. There's a discrepancy there of like, okay, was it PEDs? Was it not? To me, it's like, I don't care that it wasn't like steroids. He's saying that it was for mental health reasons, but the bottom line is Paul George has been in the NBA a very long time. He knows the protocol. He knows that whatever type of medication he's taking, whatever the case may be, it could be viewed under, a performance-enhancing drug, anti-drug policy standpoint. He should be getting that check with the doctors. He's not a rookie. Like, if this was like Janai Broom got suspended, I'd be like, okay, he might not really know the protocols of like really what he's got to do yet. Like Paul George, as you mentioned, has been around for a while. And I don't think he has an excuse here. And I mean, sure, I appreciate him putting that statement out where he says he took full responsibility. I would sure hope so. You don't really have a choice, but sure, like, okay, respect you for that, I guess. But yeah, I don't know, Zach. I can't defend him anymore. I still am going to count on him to come back and perform it the way he had. But I think I'm done kind of, bending over backwards to defend Paul George to other Sixers fans.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree. We've talked a lot about the Sixers throughout this season, just through text and whatever. And I haven't been the most, positive advocate for Paul George since he came to, like, I was excited when he came to the Sixers, and I haven't been excited since the day that he came to the Sixers, to be completely honest with you. I mean, the news in and of itself is blindsiding, but I mean, I feel like the Sixers are at a point where if they do it right, they can mitigate the damage pretty easily from his absence. I feel like in terms of like actual performance on the court, that's something they can definitely do. But we keep recapping the fact that Paul George is a veteran talent. He's been in the league a long time. He knows a lot about basketball. He knows a lot about this team and how they function. Not having him on the court solely for that reason is absolutely going to be a hindrance to this team, and that's where my disappointment lies. Again, I'm not, you know, down on my knees crying because he's not going to be on the court tomorrow against the Clippers. But I mean, I'm still disappointed that like VJ Edgecombe is this incredible sensation. Jared McCain's trying to get his swagger back. Tyrese Maxey is this young force in the league. I mean, the Sixers have some incredible young talent, and having a mentor like Paul George on the floor with them, for 30 minutes a game is super important to that development and to the team's style of play. And I think not having him there for that is going to be the biggest detriment to the Sixers for the next couple of months.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even recently, like they beat Houston a couple weeks ago. Like I thought he was awesome in that game. I mean, you mentioned the Bucks game. Like I mean, obviously, on occasion he can break out offensively like that. So just having that X factor and also that veteran instinct of like he is a connective piece on the offense. He gets guys open looks. He gets plenty of steals in space. So like they're gonna miss that. And you kind of mentioned, we originally wanted to do this pod to just kind of assess where the Sixers are standing right now in the Eastern Conference, and Paul George not being on the court is going to certainly impact their fortunes as they're going to try and avoid that play-in spot, stay in that top five, top four range. Right now they're the sixth seed, but it wasn't too many weeks ago that they were in that four spot. So I guess we can get into kind of looking at the rest of this team and what they're going to have to do now going forward. Like you kind of mentioned, you kind of think they can at least kind of mitigate the damage for the next month or so at forward. And I guess Barlow will be stepping back into that starting lineup now with Paul George out. Just what are you kind of seeing on the wing right now that makes you at least somewhat confident that it won't be, won't tank this season necessarily?
Yeah. So you mentioned Barlow, and I think, you know, I, I have confidence in Barlow as a player. I was looking at his performance in the game against New Orleans yesterday. He only took 4 shots in 28 minutes and only got 3 rebounds. He wasn't too much of a force on the offense, but he did have 2 steals and he did have a plus 14 plus minus. It's the second highest on the court out of any player other than Joel Embiid, who had a monstrous night. And so I think that if he can be a defensive presence, that would be something we definitely can use. I think his offensive game needs to improve, but with more time on the court now that Paul George isn't there, that's going to happen. If Nick Nurse recognizes that and continues to push that kind of agenda, I think he can definitely be a key piece of what we need. And, I was also looking at Trendon Watford, coming off the bench. He had 17 minutes in that game against the Pelicans, too. 5 points on 5 shots, 6 rebounds. If you can get a guy like Trendon Watford, who's up there in the top three on the team for the night, in getting those boards, that's going to be incredibly important. So I think mostly what I've been thinking is you mentioned earlier, and this is a really great thing to tie in, that Paul George's defensive presence was super important to this team this season up until now, and now that he's out. I think the combination of Barlow and Watford off the bench working together can sort of be a decent stopgap in putting together that defensive presence between the two of them to replace Paul George. I don't know if you feel the same way on that, but that's kind of my opinion on how I've thought about that recently.
Yeah, I think it's going to have to be, an all hands on deck approach. I mean, Oubre's the other one, of course. He's already in the starting lineup. Barlow has certainly been all season, I think, just from getting those steals. He's been doing that, I would say, even increasingly consistently over the past month or so. His steals per game are probably well over one in the calendar year of 2026. Now, his issue, I mean, you mentioned offensively, like his offensive limitations haven't been as much of an issue when he's on the court with all these other scorers. But if Paul George isn't going to be there, they're going to need guys to score more. And Barlow's probably weakest point of his offense is his 3-point shot, his outside shooting. So can he find ways to just maybe cut to the basket a little more, play off Embiid more, grow chemistry with Embiid, Maxey, and just kind of get, uncontested looks from what the defense looking off him? He's going to have to take advantage of that because, it hasn't been something he's really had to do at a at a reliable rate. It's nice when it happens. Occasionally he'll get, a 10, a 12, a 14-point game, but it hasn't been something they've had to ask of him very much. And I agree with you that if they're going to want to stay afloat, especially with some of the tougher games they have, like he's going to have to find a way. And I don't want to put too much on the guy. Like this is the first year of his NBA career. He's played, a significant amount of minutes. He's just gonna have to step up. It's that simple. And you mentioned Watford. Like he's the scoring piece where I'm hoping that like Barlow can kind of mitigate the damage for Paul George defensively. Watford's probably the guy who's gonna have to step up on offense because we've seen it. Like he can handle the ball. It doesn't always end well. Some games it's great. Some games, he doesn't finish at the rim. He turns the ball over. He's kind of all over the place. But there's been stints in his career where he has found some consistency for a few games at a time, and if he can just harness that, make the most of his minutes off the bench, that would help the Sixers tremendously because he's going to have to do some more ball handling now. I think absolutely because you're not going to ask Dembona or Barlow to do that, so he's going to have to be the one to do that. And I like that he has the chemistry with Maxey. They seem to be pretty good friends, but it's two guys that are unproven or in Watford's case just a little inconsistent, and I don't know. Now, Zach, I'll ask you this: Kelly Oubre is the other guy that I think, when it comes to Paul George's perimeter defense, I think Kelly Oubre has flashed the most ability to kind of replicate that in spurts. But his shooting in January has been red hot. I talked about this on the last pod, but he's been shooting the three like better than he has probably in a very long time in his career, if not in his entire career. It might be the best stretch. So he's going to have to get back in like Phoenix Suns Kelly Oubre mode and kind of maybe actually score 18 to 20 a night for almost every game for the next month or so.
Yeah, you make a great point because I'm looking at his stats from his career here. If the season ended today, he would be, well above a point, almost 2 points higher for his best 3-point career. His best career 3-point percentage. I mean, he's shooting 37% from the arc right now. That kind of offensive production is something that we definitely need. 14.2 points a game. He doesn't share the rock all that much, but he is shifty. He knows how to dribble, and if you can have that kind of weapon open from three, if you combine that with somebody like Watford, who's putting in, you mentioned that you want him to drive to the basket more, sit in the paint, and try to play some bully ball a little bit more. If you can have, the teams not suspecting or expecting Watford or Barlow to be playing that role in the paint, and they start to drive in there, you're going to get points there. Then they're going to start focusing on them because they're like, oh no, we didn't know that they could do that. And you're leaving players like Oubre, who are having some of the best 3-point or is having the best 3-point shooting year of his career, open on the outside. That could be a huge thing. And I completely agree with you on that. I think I had pretty high expectations for Oubre coming into the season. I think he's definitely lived up to that, in my opinion. He's flashy. He's had a great couple of games over the last week or two. I think that could be huge. I think that definitely is something that I don't even think it needs to happen.
Yeah. I'm interested to see if they do more Watford and Oubre lineups because that's what Watford likes to do is get downhill, and as I mentioned, to varying levels of success to my eyes in Philadelphia. But if Kelly's spacing the floor, it makes it a lot easier for a guy like Watford to actually play big minutes. I think a big reason he hasn't played a lot recently is because Paul George and Oubre kind of, they kind of displace him in the rotation. And then if you're gonna have Barlow playing as hard as he does on the rebound the ball, playing defense, I don't know. Watford's kind of been the odd man out, but I think this is his time to seize an opportunity. He's on a 1-year deal. You have an opportunity to make an impact on a team that's in the playoff race. Like this could be his kind of make or break moment in the NBA in a lot of ways. This is I believe it's his 5th season. Like this could be where he has the opportunity to elevate himself over like that minimum level salaried player. We'll have to see if he's able to step up to that. But I don't know. The other lineup you mentioned to me before we started was the Adem and Joel lineups. We kind of buried the lead with Embiid. I talked about him on the last pod, but even since then, over the past week, he's had a couple 40-point games. Like he's getting really back into it offensively. And they've kind of flashed this Bona and Embiid lineup at times, very very few minutes at a time in these games, but occasionally they've done it. And if Embiid's going to make his threes again, he started pretty slow on 3-point range this season, but he's been making them at the level he was when he was the MVP again. I don't know. Talk about what you think we could get out of that lineup, because I agree with you that there's certain cases where it actually could benefit the team.
Right. Yeah. So we talked about it before we started recording, and I'm going to recap kind of what we went through that way. Having Bona and Embiid on the court at the same time, you're putting a lot of body on the court. These are two big, strong guys. They're tall. They're forces in the paint. They're hard to get around on defense. If you can put the combo of Bona and Embiid together on the floor and accompany it with the shiftiness and speed and playmaking ability from guys like Maxey, Oubre, McCain, and Edgecombe, you've got a pretty incredible 1-2 punch on offense, and you've got a lot of opportunity to create turnover chances on defense. And I think it's not something that we're going to see consistently, because I really don't think that kind of style of basketball works for what they're trying to do. But I think if you can catch teams off guard in key moments when you need to break away and get a couple of points later in the game, or the Sixers struggle really heavily. We talked about those third quarter blues where it seems like they come out at halftime and they forget how to play basketball for a quarter, and it's super frustrating. And a lot of that comes on the defensive end. And I think if you can put those two super strong bodies in the paint and have teams have to fight for that chance to get into the paint and go for a layup or take a close contested shot, I don't think you're going to have great success taking those contested shots when you've got Embiid and Bona in your face. If you know that when Bona and Embiid are going to be on the court together, that teams are going to divert to shooting the three, then you can plan defensively around that and try to mitigate it in that way. And I think if you use it in the right scenarios, obviously just for a couple minutes a game, just to catch teams off guard, honestly, it won't only be beneficial to the team, but in my opinion, it's also something that I'm really looking forward to being able to watch, because I think playing that style of basketball is very unorthodox in today's league, and I would really like to see the Sixers try and make it work, especially in this time period where they got to figure something out while George is gone.
Yeah, I agree, because like you said, when we're not open in the second half with George and Oubre, who are just legit perimeter defenders, like Bona has shown that he can move his feet. Like he's not gonna lock down a Brunson on the perimeter, but if you can just put him on the weak side on defense to help Embiid out, like that's probably the area of Embiid's game that has declined the most is his defense, especially in the interior. And it's just to have an athlete like that on the team, I think they should be taking more advantage of it. I like that Bona has mostly supplanted Drummond in the rotation, but I I'm not gonna like you said, I'm not sitting here and saying this needs to be a lineup that they use even more than just like 3 minutes, 4 minutes at a time. But you said it, like there's so many times in these games, especially in the second half, where the Sixers lose momentum, and it does really feel like they don't. I think trying something different could work, because I do think that if you have Bona running in transition, like sometimes Maxi and VJ they need Embiid's got to be out there, but Embiid can't always get it done for them in the way they need in transition. And I think Embiid is playing well enough as a scorer right now that you can trust like Bona to be out there for a couple minutes with him, because he's also not clunky. Like I said, he can move his feet. He's only 6'9". Like yes, he doesn't space the floor, but if Oubre's going to make his threes and if Embiid's going to be making his threes, he's really the only traditional center on offense out there. So I don't know. There's a lot of issues that lineup can exploit, but if the Knicks run out Towns and Robinson, why can't we put Bona in for a couple minutes? Because Bona's gonna be faster than Robinson and Towns. He's gonna get down in transition. He might get ravaged on the boards by Mitchell Robinson, but everybody on our team gets that happens to them. So what's the difference? I don't know. I think they could do it. I liked when they did it once or twice. I think it was in December. They tried it a couple games. I don't know. I'd be open to it again. I don't think it's going to save their season, but like you said, with Paul George out, they're going to have to – it's no longer the same game plan every game. You don't have the 30-minute starter anymore. And we keep harping back on that, but that's truly going to change the Sixers season, and how they respond to this suspension is going to determine if they can avoid the play-in, get a favorable matchup in the first round, etc. So I like that you brought that up. I think it's – some people roll their eyes, but I think there's more legitimacy to it than people want to admit.
I mean, I definitely agree with you when you say that like something new needs to be like you've got, 3 solid months left of the season. You're not at the point yet where you say like things can't change because it's gonna screw everything up too much. There's a lot there's a lot of season left to be played. 3 months of the season is a lot of time. A lot of things can change. Other players can get hurt. Players will come back. Teams will find a new way to work. It's there's still time, so I feel like trying something new like this is not going to be detrimental to the team in any way. It might look bad for a couple of minutes, but then it's only those minutes that were sacrificed, and they know not to try it again, or they know if they're going to try it, they got to do it
Hmm.
under a different situation. I
Hmm.
think I think with that 30 minute a game starter gone, you've got to start trying new stuff. You got to see what sticks to the wall. I think that this is definitely something that teams won't expect that you can use to your advantage. But once teams see you do it and it loses its potency, you got to come up with something else.
Yeah, and Nurse has always kind of been a coach who is willing to adjust on the fly. Like, I mean, for example, everyone thought we can shift to this guy here. Jared McCain has 12 plus points in 3 of his last 4 games. He got sent to the G League a couple weeks ago. Hasn't played consistently in 2 months. I certainly didn't think he'd be a factor into the season again. I thought we were pushing that to next year at the earliest. And all of a sudden, he's impacting this offense again. And you can talk about the opponents we played. It doesn't matter. This guy was looked kind of lost on the court. Um, I just hope that he can keep this up. Because if he can, I mean, Maxi's been playing such a tremendous amount of minutes, and I think we're going to need him to play those minutes in the playoffs. But Zach, I would love if we can get to these dog days of the season and like Maxi not have to play 40 minutes a game in March to ensure the Sixers make the playoffs.
The minute you said that, the first thing that flashed into my mind is the New York Knicks. Their style of play for the last couple of years has been we're going to play our starters for the entire game, and by the time we get to the postseason, they're going to be worn out and they're not going to be able to play at any level that they're supposed to be. And the fact that Tyrese Maxey is playing as much as he is thrilling to me because I love being able to watch him on the court and I love being able to expect to be able to see that playmaker on the court, for every game. And his presence on the court and his playmaking ability is the thing that pushes this team forward. But that's the thing. If that's what this team is built around, then you need that the whole season, and you can't keep having Maxi play this many minutes a game. And so, when I thought about Jared McCain at the beginning of the season, I was so disappointed because, I mean, in Philadelphia, we've had a bad rap in recent history of players forgetting how to play basketball. And so I was really hoping that that wouldn't occur again. And I think the feeling of it was slightly mitigated by the fact that we have Tyrese Maxey and we have VJ Edgecombe. We've got great young talent on this team. I really didn't want to see a player that was so heavily, like everybody in the city was so excited by this kid last year. Like we all want to see him succeed. There's no bad blood in the city against him. But I was already like, I can't lie and say that I wasn't already looking at situations where they might ship him out before the trade deadline, or his career in Philadelphia just won't continue in the same way it has been because now that Edgecomb's playing the way he is, he really doesn't. There really isn't a space for him to play consistent minutes on this roster anymore, except for if he can let Tyrese Maxey sit down for a little bit and play some of those key minutes off the bench. He doesn't have to be a 20-point per game producer. He doesn't have to be, this crazy offensive weapon. But if he can continue to put together, like you said, these 12-point per game, outings and be a consistent, background guy off the bench while he's continuing to find his groove, and I think that would be immensely valuable to a team in this position. I completely agree with you.
You mentioned the Knicks, like we played them several times this season. That's something I've been impressed with them this year. Like they've started to let their bench kind of well, they made some key signings in that area in the offseason, but they've corrected that with their coaching change. And Nick Nurse has always been another guy who's played his stars a lot of minutes, but so I get it with Maxi. But I do like that McCain is seeming to find a way to impact this team again. I've been yapping all season about how I get he's coming off the injury and there's certain things he's going to have to work his way back into. But you know what? The one thing he's always been great at is shooting the 3-point ball. I thought there was so many times this year where I've said this before on like pretty much every Sixers fan that I talk to. I've said this over and over, but I'm going to keep saying it because it proved itself this week. I was like, why are we having McCain play ISO ball when he like Why does he have the ball in his hands all the time when he's supposed to be this great movement shooter? This week, those past 4 games, 22 of his 32 shots came from three. And guess what? He scored the ball and impacted winning in those games. Which, yes, bad teams, but they were close games because this team plays a close game against every team in the league. So it's going to matter, especially with another guy we could talk about, Grimes. Especially with him forgetting how to shoot over the past month. We need that from McCain right now. I'd love to see him, keep playing like that, especially with Embiid, like playing off of Embiid when they were on the court together. That was nice to see. Um, Grimes and him together should be like this awesome, backup backcourt for VJ and Tyrese. But those guys play so many minutes that we don't always get to see that. Like I can't even remember a lot of times Grimes and McCain shared the court this year, Zach.
Yeah, it's interesting that you make that point, and you did mention at the beginning of during the intro that we were going to talk about how the trade deadline's coming up. And I think the name that comes up in my head the most, if the Sixers were to make a move before the deadline, I think Quentin Grimes is at the top of that list. There was a lot of talk before the season about whether or not he was coming back to Philadelphia. We were talking about, what's his role going to be on the team. And I think, just like you said it before, a lot of people expected that his role was going to be, that second line out there with McCain when Maxey needed to sit. And you really haven't seen a lot of presence from the guy this year. I mean, he's had his moments just like everybody else on the team has, but it hasn't been what we expected from him. And there's been nights where he shoots the ball and it doesn't go anywhere near the net. And you're just like, what is this guy doing on the court? And so, it's not like I'm saying that we need to get rid of Quentin Grimes because he's just bad. That's totally not true. And he definitely adds a lot of key things to this team. But I'm personally of the opinion that I don't think the Sixers need to make any moves at the trade deadline. I think if they do, then there's some specific needs that they could fill. And if they end up going that route, my opinion is that Quentin Grimes is going to be their main talking point when they call up other teams.
Yeah, I think so. And he has that, that qualifying offer salary of $9 million that he took because he wound up not signing an extension with the Sixers. He kind of bet on himself this season, and like the guy he played really well in, I would say, like that November range. Like he was making some clutch shots at the end of the game for the Sixers. Over the past 2 months, I don't know where that went. 32% from three, actually 31.8% from three in January. So uh, I've seen some other Sixers fans, like people that honestly probably break down these games way more than I do, but they made a good point that, like, we talk about the third quarter defense and it's been really bad, and Grimes has been a culprit of that. But a lot of the time, they're not really having him play that point of attack defense that he was at the beginning of the year. And part of that's probably Paul George being healthy, which fair enough. Well, Paul George ain't here anymore. So I would like to see Grimes maybe, like, let's start counting on him and his perimeter defense at the top of the key again. Like, let's not have him running after shooters because clearly, if you watch like pretty much any game the Sixers have lost in January, Quinn Grimes is giving up ridiculous open threes. But I think that's part of the reason is because his defense is kind of not being utilized the way it was earlier in the season. Now, I would be open to trading him, especially because I don't think he'll be back on the team next year. It would kind of be contingent on like you kind of have to make up your mind of like we were talking about, lowering Maxey's minute load, things like that. And I think McCain can do that. If McCain's going to play the way he did this week going forward, I think that helps. But are you willing to sacrifice that break for VJ? Like, are we going to continue to ask VJ to shoulder such a burden? Because I think if Grimes is traded, I don't know, like unless they're willing to start playing like Oubre with some of these other forwards, which I don't really think Nurse is going to go to. I don't know. Like Grimes is not someone that I think is very replaceable, but I would also be open to sacrificing his position to upgrade on the wing here because as we talked about, like it's a lot of if at forward for the Sixers right now. Even Kelly, like I think Kelly's been great, and I actually think he's going to keep playing the way he has. But as we both mentioned, like his 3-point percentage for his career does not match what he's doing this season, even if he's playing with confidence right now. So I don't know. Like you had some trades. I'm running them by me again. Like I think it's going to be tough to trade Quinn Grimes, but I do think the conversation is worth having. I do think it is worth having.
Yeah, so I'm gonna give you two names, and I want you to continue to take them with a grain of salt. Because again, I'm of the opinion that I don't think the Sixers need to make any big moves, and I completely agree with you that it's going to be kind of hard to replace Quentin Grimes, especially if you're going to have to lean on VJ Edgecombe in all those minutes, in a
Mhm.
season where he's still finding his way. Even though he's playing great, he still is becoming his own NBA player. And so there were
Mhm.
two players that I looked at while I was looking through ESPN today, and one was Easton out of Houston, and
Mhm.
one was Okongwu out of Atlanta. I really haven't done a ton of research into them, again, because I don't really think the Sixers need to do that much, if anything, before the end of the week. But I think if
Mhm.
we're looking for more on the win, or if we're looking for more at the power forward spot, and we're trying to fill that gap that's going to be lost from George, is something that we can do. But in the same breath, I think, are we really willing to give up Quentin Grimes, even though, like you did say, that there's no guarantee he's going to re-sign at the end of the year, and that's
Mhm.
fine. But are we giving up? It's not just going to be a one for one. We're going to have to give up somebody else, or we're going to have to give up some draft capital for it.
Mhm.
And George will be back in a month, and Grimes is still going to be able to fill that second line role with McCain, and it's still
Mhm.
going to keep working, in my opinion, the way that it has before. I mean, these are definitely names that we could shop, and they would definitely be welcome additions to the team. But when George comes back, what are you going to do? If the
Mhm.
if the, the guy that you trade for outperforms Barlow or Watford, what are you going to sit them on the bench and have them play 5-6 minutes a game instead?
Yeah.
When you've
Right.
already started to come up with sequences on how to use Barlow and Watford more in the game. I don't think it's worth going through the effort to give up something for a month-long stopgap, and you don't even know if the player you trade for is going to be on the team at the end of the year, depending on what their contract is or whether or not you do anything with them in the first place. So those
Yeah.
are the two ideas that I shopped. I don't know if it's worth it in the long run.
Yeah, I like Eason, like mentioned, because he's a guy the Sixers. I think like a lot of Sixers fans have wanted Eason for a while,
Right.
and I think Houston is really weak at guard right now. Like, it's just real, they're really weak, and I think they could benefit from a Grimes. I think the issue for us here, they signed Dorian Finney-Smith in the offseason. I think that was partly because they kind of were thinking about like, okay, Eason's really good, but are we going to be able to re-sign him long term when we're already paying a bunch of other guys? Well, Dorian Finney-Smith got hurt, and Eason decided to shoot 50% from three for the first 3 months of the season, and now his value is at the highest it's ever been. Now, as I said, I think Houston should consider adding a guard, but I don't know if Grimes is going to be their number one option. Now, he did go to Houston. He went to University of Houston, so he's an area guy, but, well, I guess he's not an area guy, but he was familiar with the area. He's been around those parts, but I don't know. Like, I just think Houston they're gonna call like three other teams before they're calling the Sixers for Grimes. But it would be a low risk move for them. It would be a low risk move for them. The Sixers would certainly have to give up. Like, I would happily give up a first round pick in the future for Eason, because he is that good, and I think he'd be great on this team. Now, but you mentioned it's like there's also team chemistry things you have to think of. Like, Dominic Barlow has played his heart out for this team. He's about to earn himself a regular contract. I mean, I don't even want to get into that because I'm just assuming they're going to convert that contract. I think that's not even a conversation worth having. So I'm just going to assume the guy who started 75% of the games is going to get his contract. But that's the thing. Like, if he's going to get his NBA contract, and then we're going to be like, oh, by the way, now we have Tari Eason, and now we don't have a backup shooting guard, and you're benched, Dominic Barlow. Like, I don't think the guys on the team are going to get down with that. As good as Eason is, unfortunately, we can't play fantasy GM all the time as much as I would like to, because I like Tari Eason, I always have. Um, but yeah, and then Okongwu is a fun one because this team needs another center who can also kind of play the four. And as much as we were talking about those Bona lineups, well, Okongwu is a guy we could get away with those kind of lineups with a lot more consistently because he's a lot better of an offensive player um, than Bona. He's under contract though for a while, I saw, which is fine by me because like they were gonna pay Grimes 18 million this summer. He wouldn't take it. So, or 15. I don't know what the exact number was, but they were willing to give him an extension, and they didn't. So to me, is like if Atlanta wanted to resign Grimes, like they could get off that salary. Um, I don't know. They're an interesting one because they've been rumored. They've been rumored for Giannis. They've been rumored for Anthony Davis. Like if you get a five man like that, all of a sudden, like Okongwu is no longer you know, a stud for you, like a starter. So I think that's like a something I'd look at in the summer. I don't know if they're going to be able to pull that off mid-season. But I like that you brought that name up because I think that is someone the Sixers should look at, like maybe in the offseason. Um, Atlanta's kind of in a weird spot. Like, we don't need to go into them, but like they've already made two trades. They traded Trae Young and then they made a smaller trade today. Like I don't know. It seems like they want to wheel and deal. So I don't know. Maybe a Okongwu will be on. I don't know. I think he could be a great Sixer, but um, that's neither here nor there. I did have one trade. I'll run you by one of my trades, Zach.
All right.
Um, I was looking at the Pelicans have former Villanova Wildcat Sadiq Bey, who is having a really good season. He's on a cheap salary, $6 million a year for the next 2 years. I also was thinking about you'll laugh at this, but let's bring in the other Jose Alvarado, Pelicans Jose. But the thing is, if McCain is playing the way he just did this week, like that gives me hope that like we don't need Jose Alvarado. So I'd be open to just trading for Sadiq Bey. Gives you a wing at the power forward spot who can rebound and shoot the three ball. Like that's not what we're really getting from Watford or Barlow, but that would kind of phase Watford out of the rotation. But I don't know. Like I'd throw a couple second rounders, and then you can use Eric Gordon or maybe even a Justin Edwards if they want a younger player. That's another guy I've been looking at. It'd be cool to have him back in Philly. I don't know. Like he's probably one other. The issue with him is one, he's having a really solid season. He's averaged 16 points. Now I still think most teams would trade him because he's on a short term contract. And New Orleans is pretty bad. But the issue is Joe Dumars is pretty disconnected with reality. He might view Sadiq Bey as like the next like I don't know. I don't even know who. Like so he might want to hold on to him and not trade him. But that was my idea. I don't know. He's kind of a similar vein of Eason, but the difference is Houston's a good team. New Orleans is a garbage team. Maybe they'd be more likely to make the move. I don't know.
Well, I mean, I like the move. I'm looking at his stats right now. I mean, to get a guy that's shooting 35% from three and is scoring 16 points a game and
Mm-hmm.
is up towards the top of his rebounds per game total in his career. As much as I like these trade ideas, my mind continues to go back to this is really going to screw up the chemistry of this team. And it's
Mm-hmm.
already been, put out of place because of the absence of George.
Yeah.
I don't want to keep adding to that. And
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I haven't done enough research into the topic, to be honest with you, because ever since, over the last 3 weeks, my mind's been pretty set in my opinion that I don't think that this team needs to make any moves of this caliber. And it's not
Mm-hmm.
like moving Grimes in a couple of seconds for Sadiq Bey is, this crazy of a move, especially because we've repeated at this point that Grimes is on an expiring contract and he's not coming back here, next season.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if you could get this move done, I think it would be great. But then again, you're pushing one of Barlow or Watford out of the rotation. It's gonna be Watford. It's not gonna be Barlow.
Yeah.
But we just talked for 20 minutes about the way that Barlow and Watford can have an incredible impact on this team in the next 30 days.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like you'll be able to accomplish that more you'll have a better success rate with Bay and Barlow rather than Barlow and Watford. But then again, you're still putting VJ in that incredibly uncomfortable position, and you've got to find somebody to fill that role. So, are you going to make another trade, or are you going to have them include somebody in there as well? Like, what? There's
Yeah.
so many different caveats there that it makes it so difficult to understand.
Yeah. Sadiq's like I said, like I feel like if New Orleans was competently run, like I don't think they'd have to give up Grimes to get Sadiq Bey. I think they could just throw some second rounders and an Edwards their way, and it would be that. But I don't know. New Orleans might be stingy. That's all if you read into the reporting, like they don't want to trade anyone on their team. It's like, guys,
Right,
you have 14 wins and it's February. Look, what are you
right.
talking about? But that's
That's
a
why I
whole
put
a
Grimes in the
whole other conversation.
conversation because they're just not on planet Earth.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. We'll see if Sadiq Bey gets moved. He's probably the one guy I think at the power forward spot I would consider adding. But I don't know. I think those are good trade ideas. It's always fun to talk about the trade deadline, but I'm mostly with you though. Like this team has been what I was thinking about earlier today was like this is probably in terms of quality, not counting last year. Of course, they were terrible last year, but not counting last year's team. This is probably quality wise one of the worst teams they've had. But it's also probably the team I've enjoyed watching the most
I
in a good
agree
5 or so
completely.
years. Like
Yeah,
Like they're just on the, because even if they're not perfect and they're in these crazy like games that they shouldn't be, these close games, like you can tell they're on the upswing, and it's, you don't want to mess with that unless you really have to. And I think if they could add Sadiq Bey or someone adjacent to that without giving up a rotation piece, I think it could be good. But like you said, if we're talking about trading Grimes, it creates another hole in the team. It's like, God forbid VJ were to, and if VJ missed a week in December, like even if that happened again, just for a week, like if you don't have Grimes, what do you do now? Like you're gonna be in a
Right.
tough spot.
Got nothing.
So I agree. I think they need to make like a very like between the margins trade, if they're gonna do it. So we'll have to see. I mean, the deadline is Thursday, so they got about 4 or 5 days here. But yeah, the last topic we wanted to touch on today, Zach, was just kind of looking at the East standings, and like we're talking about how this team is constructed right now, and just what are they going to be able to do come playoff time? Because I think at this point they've pretty much solidified their playoff spot for the most part. I mean, God forbid they get in the play in and then wind up like getting bounced. But I think they're good enough. If Embiid and Max are going to play like this, I think they finish outside of that frame. But just when you survey the East right now, like one, I guess, do you have belief that this could be a Sixers team that actually surprises and goes a lot further than we thought? And are there any teams that you're more or maybe less confident that the Sixers could hold their own against?
Well, I did some research. When I say research, I just looked at the schedule, and I
Yeah.
feel like there's teams that I'm surprised that the Sixers have had a good success rate against this year, and there are
Mm-hmm.
teams that I'm surprised that the Sixers have played pretty horribly against this
Yeah.
year. And I think I looked at the Sixers are currently the 6th seed in the East, and I look at
Mm-hmm.
the 5 teams above them. You've got Cleveland at the 5, Toronto at the 4, the Knicks at the 3, and then the Celtics and the Pistons. Now we could probably do a whole pod on what the hell's going on with Detroit at the top of this conference, but
Yeah. Yeah.
um, when I looked at, I have it written down here. You know, of those 5 teams, the only team that the Sixers have a winning record against this year is Boston. They're two
Yeah.
and one against Boston, and
Go
they played them
figure.
twice they played them twice, I think, in the first month of the
Yeah.
year. Yeah,
That's
they
right.
played them once in October, on October 22nd, and they played them on October 31st. All 3 of
Mm-hmm.
the games came before Thanksgiving, so that you
Yeah.
haven't seen them for over half the season at this point, right?
Which
So
is a
I take
blessing
that
because we're
right,
very lucky. We're very lucky
right,
about
very lucky because I mean the Celtics are a really strong team, and it scares me to think that when Tatum comes back,
that. Yeah.
that I don't think Detroit has that first seed on lock anymore. Because I mean, if he can fit back into that rotation and be the caliber of player we know Jason Tatum to be, then I
Yeah.
don't know what's stopping Boston in the East. And so that winning record I take with a heavy grain of
I
salt.
have
Right?
I have the answer for you actually.
Go ahead.
Joel Embiid, because they don't have a center this year
True.
at all. I mean, Kate has
Right.
been all right, but he's not stopping
Right.
Embiid. If Embiid's gonna play like this, I don't know. I
You make a
That's the thing.
you make a good
Right
point.
now, we'd play them in the 3-6,
Right.
and
We
I think we'd
do.
win the series. I think we'd win the series. Would we win the next series? I don't know, but I think we'd win that series.
I think, in my opinion, I think if Boston could be a winnable series. And this is something I've been waiting to say for such a long time. I like
Okay.
how we've been playing the New York Knicks this season. I like how we've
Okay.
been playing them. It's been working. If we ended up playing the Knicks in the first round, because I think actually us and the Knicks would be the 3-6 right now, because I think
Would it?
Boston's
Okay.
in that 2 spot. So
Oh, I think they
we
might have got a win earlier tonight.
oh, it hasn't updated yet.
Yeah. Okay. They won earlier today. I wrote my standings down earlier in the day. Yeah, they beat the Bucks earlier today. I had it written
Okay,
down on my iPad from like
no,
this
you're
morning.
fine. I literally just looked at it an hour ago to write these notes
Okay.
down, so that's
I
probably
got
why I
you.
have it this way. But we would end up
No, you're
playing the
right.
Knicks in the 3-6. And
Yeah.
so I personally dread playing the Knicks during the regular season
Hmm.
because their fans drown us out every time. Because if you can pay a quarter of what it costs to watch a game at Madison Square Garden to drive 2 hours, 3 hours
Right.
down, the Garden State
Right.
Parkway to go to Xfinity Mobile Arena, you're going to do it. And the fans play a huge role because players like Brunson and McBride and Anthony Towns, those kinds of players thrive off of environment and energy. Brunson gets fired up. And
Hmm.
so when we play the Knicks, I always dread it because either we win with heart and we fight them, or we
Yeah.
sit down and let them walk all over us. And I hate that. And I think
Yeah.
this year they've gotten rid of a little bit of that inconsistency, and they've really been playing them close.
Hmm.
They have a 2-1 record against them. Obviously, their most recent game
That was
on
rough.
the 24th last week, they lost a close game at the end there.
Hmm.
Embiid was pretty phenomenal in
Well,
that game.
let's not sugarcoat it though. They sucked in that game.
Yeah, I mean they lost a close game, but they didn't look good.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, and the other two meetings they had with them, came earlier in the year, and they looked pretty good in my opinion. And so, I
Hmm.
mean, I like the way that this. If the Sixers ended up playing the Knicks in the first round, honestly, I'd be pretty happy with that matchup. I think they could definitely put a good dent into that series, and
Yeah.
they definitely have a good chance of taking it. Um, it's the two teams that are directly above the Sixers that I'm most concerned about, and that's the Cavs and the Raptors. I know you said that you're not really concerned about the Raptors,
I just think they're
but
fraud. I don't care. I just hate them. Scotty's
that's
been very good. Scotty has been
Scotty
very
has been good.
good,
That's my thing.
but like I put a TikTok out about this a couple weeks ago. Like Scotty is basically a good Ben Simmons. Like he's willing to
I
take a
saw
couple
that. Yeah, I
threes a
saw that this
game.
morning.
Yeah. He takes a couple threes a game. I appreciate all he's doing defensively, but I mean, unless Paul George comes back from his suspension like as a shell of himself, I think he'll be able to meet that matchup enough where, like, if him and Oubre can condense on Scotty, I cannot believe we're talking about this stupid Raptors team, but like we have to because they beat us. I just I think if we can take Scotty's like if we can mitigate his offense, I just don't think Brandon Ingram and Emmanuel Quickly and Jakob Pertl are going to be able to do anything. I think we would kick their tail. I'm not worried about those frauds in Toronto.
But what do you think about Cleveland? Because we're
Oh,
0 3
they'd
against
massacre
Cleveland.
us. They'd massacre
They
us. We
they
saw it.
kick us every time we play them.
Yeah, yeah. Cleveland would. We need to avoid the 4-5 against Cleveland, but Cleveland might
Yeah,
get up to
desperately.
3. I will say, like the problem with Cleveland is I do think Embiid could do pretty well against them offensively to a degree, but like it depends on how they use Mobley in that series. Like if they want to double Embiid, then like Embiid will have a tough time. But they probably need Mobley to just play some weak side defense because then Maxey and VJ are going to get in the lane.
Right,
Because as good as Mitchell and Garland are, they're not getting a lot of stops. So
right.
that's like on paper that should be like a closer matchup. Like you'd think like Mitchell and Tyrese like kind of even caliber guys. Garland's very good offensively, but like VJ's much better athlete, can get by him. And they just made a good trade too. They picked up 2 depth pieces. I actually would have talked about Keon Ellis on this podcast if Cleveland hadn't traded for him. He was a guy I wanted. I think Cleveland got deeper the other day. I just worry because like sometimes we get the Cavs that actually rebound and protect the paint, and other times Jared Allen is as bad of a rebounder as post knee injury Embiid is. So I'm not going to hold that too much against Embiid. I just think it is who he is now. But if Allen comes to play in that playoff series, he could give Joel a little bit of a tough time. Maybe not preventing him from scoring, but on the glass, I think that would be the X factor there. But also, I mean, the Cavs 2 weeks ago they swept us in back-to-back games, and that was we talked about earlier. Like just where we didn't guard the perimeter, we just didn't, and normally that's what Cleveland does, but that's what we did against them. So I am scared of them.
Yeah, I definitely think the Cavs are the team that has our number the most, and I think that 4-5 is what we desperately need to
Yeah,
stay away from. And now I was actually going to make this point, and I'm glad you brought it up. I definitely think that Cleveland could avoid that 4-5, and they could get all the way up to the 3. I wouldn't
yeah,
be surprised to see them go up that far. But then even at that point, we'd have to get out of the 6 if we want to avoid them at the 3-6 matchup.
right, right.
So basically, the next 3 months of the season, unless things change and the dynamic shifts in the East, we're
Hmm.
playing around seeding to avoid Cleveland, in my opinion.
Yeah,
Because we just went through the other teams. I mean, we didn't really touch on Detroit that much, and we didn't talk about the play-in teams because there is still a chance that the Sixers fall into the play-in.
there is.
Depending on how Paul George, like the absence of Paul George, affects this
Yeah,
team.
if Watford just sucks, like it actually could really hurt the Sixers. He needs to
Right, and I
be
mean,
at least okay. He needs to be inconsistent. If he's just consistently bad, it's not going to work.
right, and I mean, like there are teams that are just below us. Like Orlando at the 7th seed has played us hard all year. I mean,
Yeah, we were there.
you and I were there when
Ridiculous.
we were absolutely embarrassed
Well,
Thanksgiving week.
but what I'll say about that is this team
Well, half the
can't
team
shoot
was
the
missing.
three. That was the only game they decided to shoot the three all year, and we beat. You mentioned it actually. I forget if it was before we started the pod or before we started the pod, but like we held them to 91 points because that's how bad their offense can get.
Right, and I mean, half our team was gone. Like half our team was on the bench when we went to go watch that game because
That's
everybody
right.
was hurt. And
That's right.
so, I mean, you kind of have to throw a game like that, under the bridge. But I mean, I'm still not, 100% that we would do well in a play-in series against Orlando or Miami. I mean, those aren't set in stone either.
Well, and guess what? God forbid the Charlotte Hornets get in there. They just hung 130 on us a week
Yeah, that
ago.
was bad.
So,
That
I
that
mean, he didn't play, but
you want
still.
to talk about that game?
No, I never want to
No,
talk about the game again. But they've
yeah,
been
that
playing
was bad.
Charlotte. I think Charlotte will get the 8th seed. I don't see. To me, Miami, Chicago, Atlanta are a bunch of they're just twiddling their thumbs. I think Charlotte will pass all of them. To be honest.
But those are the three teams that are in the play-in every year. It's like Death,
Yeah.
Taxes, and Miami, Chicago, and Atlanta
Right.
in the play-in.
Right. Right.
So it's like,
Exactly.
what are you going to do? I mean, I'd love to see the shakeup. I mean, there's two teams that are probably not going to make the playoffs this year in Milwaukee and Indiana that are giving teams like Orlando and Charlotte that opportunity to get into the
Yeah.
postseason.
Right.
I mean, some things are just written in the stars.
I guess to wrap up, just if I asked you now, I guess if you had to make a prediction, what round of the playoffs this upstart crazy Sixers team that's in close games every night, we don't ever really know what we're gonna get with them. Where do you think they wind up in the playoffs? Like if gut reaction, prediction, whatever you want to call it, what would you say?
I think if we can avoid playing Cleveland, then I think they can make it past the first round. I
Yeah.
think the second round against most of these teams is probably where they're going to meet their maker. I mean, when have we known the Sixers to make it past the second round? But
Right.
it's just going to be another year of that, in my opinion. But I'm going to feel differently about it this year if they get bounced in the second round, especially if they keep consistent to their name and they play close games against whichever team bounces them in the second round. I'm not going
Yeah.
to feel the same way as I normally do. I'm not going to be like, we could have gone all the way this year. We could have won the conference this year. I'm like, I don't see the Sixers team making any big waves in the postseason past the second round.
Yeah.
And so if this team plays with heart and they play a good first round and they play a tough second round and they still get bounced, I'm not going to be that. I'm obviously going to be disappointed because I want to see them keep playing playoff basketball. But if they play it competitive and they get knocked in the second round, I'm really not going to be too upset about it because it's kind of where I see them going anyway. So right now I'm just enjoying the rest of this regular season because I don't expect too much out of them in the postseason except for some fun series. So
Yeah. I'm with you. I think that's where I would land too. I would say second round exit as always, but we're kind of resetting the clock here in some ways. I mean, with the exception of Embiid, of course. Unfortunately,
right.
I would love them to take, do all they can for Embiid, but we're kind of in that 2018 team again, where I don't really mind losing round two. It's valuable experience for Maxey as his first year as the guy. It's good for Edgecombe. It's good for Barlow. If McCain keeps playing, it's just good experience for these guys, and I think it will help this team in the future because I don't think they're too far off from building a legit contender. I'll be honest though, if this Paul George news hadn't happened, I probably would have had a different take. I was actually, I had the rose tinted goggles on for a good month there. I really did think they were playing well enough that they could, in a wide open East, maybe sneak their way depending on the matchup. I would have said into that Eastern Finals. This Paul George news to bring this pod full circle, I think really changed that. Just don't think they're going to win enough games to get the favorable, playoff environment. And we didn't touch on Detroit. They look beatable on paper, but as we know, their bench beat our starters. I think they're just playing really tough defense this year. I'd be scared to let Embiid play 7 straight games against Ron Holland and Isaiah Stewart. They might injure him, just roughing him up in the paint. I wouldn't want Tobias to get a playoff win over us. That's a team that I just hope they avoid completely because I don't think it would be favorable. But I don't know. I as we laid out, they match up a little better with the teams like New York and Boston that have beat us than these other teams. So I don't know. But yeah, I would say I'm with you. I think it's a second round exit, and hopefully we can be. Hopefully, it's not embarrassing to the point that we can take some pride in it.
Right, I completely agree. If that's the way that the cards fall and they play well, then I'll be satisfied with a tough second round exit.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. Well, that's going to do it for this edition of Trust the Podcast. Zach, thank you so much for joining me talking Sixers. It's been a while since we got to do it on the pod, so glad we could catch up and break down this team, and hopefully they just find a way to surprise us, maybe positively this time.
Yeah, thanks again for having me. I always love talking about the Sixers, no matter how much they disappoint me at any given point in the year. But getting to come on the pod and chop it up with you is always a thrill for me. So I'm glad you have me, and let's see how the rest of the next couple of months of this season pan out. There's a lot of ifs.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to seeing how those ifs play out. I'm sure we'll be in contact throughout the next couple of weeks to see how those things grow. So I'm looking forward to it. I didn't think I would be looking forward to it at this point in the year after last year, but I
Yeah.
truly I am looking forward to it. It's going to be fun.
I am as well. Well, thank you for joining me, Zach, and thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Trust the Podcast. Make sure to follow on Spotify and Apple if you aren't already. Make sure to follow on TikTok and also follow Tuman Talking Sports on the YouTube. Other than that, go Sixers. Catch you next time. Thanks for listening.